Just run us through how you interpret the last 24 hours, 48 hours of events in terms of particularly the escalation of violence, the standoff that we're seeing at the university in Hong Kong.
I think it's been deeply concerning for international observers, folks here in D.C., to see the escalating violence. And with the situation at the university, I think what concerns me is that it suggests that the government still believes that somehow they can pressure or coerce their way out of this situation. And laying siege to a university is not going to be the solution that we need. And with each time that you see live ammunition used, threats of live ammunition, tear gas, rubber bullets, it only seems to be entrenching the protesters further. And you have a situation that began in a largely peaceful way that has become increasingly violent over the past several months. So I think you need to see a real serious effort to come to the negotiating table by both sides, yes, but the government has to be willing to lead the way there.
Is there any sign that the violence that is being perpetuated by some of these protesters in Hong Kong is undermining their cause in Washington, where it seems they've successfully, up until this point, built up quite a bit of support?
I think there is concern about the violence, and certainly I don't think anyone here in D.C. would condone the violence on either side. But we're talking about a situation where, again, it began largely in an extremely peaceful way. And you saw really harsh tactics and brutality by the police pretty early on. And so I think there's actually a lot of sympathy for the protesters, who are young students who really, I think, are concerned about upholding rights that they were promised and the future that they believe in. And so I think here in D.C., there's a lot of empathy, and that's why you see Congress taking steps to ensure that the human rights of the protesters are preserved, human rights of Hong Kongers, and that hopefully we move toward a peaceful resolution of the situation.
Lindsey, how should we interpret the PLA helping in this cleanup over the weekend?
I don't know exactly how you interpret it, but I think that it was an ill-advised move. At best, if it was meant simply to help with a cleanup, in a situation that's already so fraught, where there's such an enormous lack of trust, it only raises questions. It's only likely to inflame sentiments further. It's not going to help. And it raises a lot of questions, like you've heard people asking, why were they out on the streets? Was this meant to be something to intimidate? Will they come out on the streets again? What's next? And so on balance, I just don't see it being a helpful move overall.
What does it tell you about the Hong Kong government in particular, though? I mean, are they losing control of the situation now that Beijing perhaps has reached that bottom line to actually maybe take it a step further with more action?
I mean, I'm not sure how much control the Hong Kong government has been in for a while. And at the end of the day, Beijing is the one who will make the final determination here, not the Hong Kong government. I think Beijing has every incentive to not see this resolved violently, but certainly the messages that they've given, the rhetoric, make clear that at the end of the day, if they had to, they would.
Lindsey, how effective do you think the legislation that's being worked up in D.C., the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, how effective do you think that would be in constraining the actions of Beijing?
I think it's certainly going to put a lot more pressure on the U.S.-China relationship at a time where it's already pretty difficult right now. I think it would make things difficult for Beijing, because you would see that the Secretary of State would have to do an annual review to certify whether there was sufficient autonomy in Hong Kong. And there's a strong likelihood they would find that there wasn't. And so I do think it would put pressure on Beijing to actually uphold the rights and the freedoms that were promised to Hong Kong a long time ago. I think also that it puts pressure on Beijing not to resolve this situation in a violent way, because it actually gives the U.S. government the authority to take steps to sanction individual actors.
We've seen, of course, this support for Carrie Lam. We saw President Xi Jinping meeting with Carrie Lam a few weeks ago in Beijing. What does that support from the central government in Beijing tell you about the future for Carrie Lam and how they expect or how they plan to continue their strategy around how to kind of contain these protests?
Clearly, they're standing by her. I don't understand that, because personally, I think they'd have a far greater chance of success if you could start perhaps with a fresh slate with the government, given the complete erosion of trust that you see right now. But they've made clear that she is their person for right now. So I hope that the Hong Kong government, if she's the person, can find a way to begin to resolve this situation. They could begin by making a serious effort at the independent inquiry that folks have been asking for a long time.